Once again, the God of heaven, who doeth all things well, has allowed us to come together for the express purpose of hearing another portion of his word, which is able to save our souls. It's so good to see you all who are here this evening. We thank God for your diligence, and we know that there are a whole host of other places you could have been this evening, and you could be doing a number of things, but we thank God that you've chose here to be here to hear what thus saith the Lord. In these perilous times, it is very much important that we understand that the important that we understand that the family is under attack. And we can see that if we read the news or if we are in current affairs at all. We know that the family of God, the one he created and instituted in the garden, is under attack. We also know that the family is the first institution that God himself gave to man. So what I want to talk to you about is the seriousness of marriage. And I want to talk about a few foolish reasons for getting married. You see, you have to, there are some foolish reasons. And the word foolish means lacking in judgment, when we don't use good judgment. There's some things that someone needs to counsel young people about marriage, the seriousness of it and the gravity of it, before, in fact, a person engages or gets into a relationship and thinking they can get out of it, because the world gives us a lot of avenues of escape from marriage. But then there's God you have to deal with. In marriage, 1 and 1 is the only place I know where the 1 and 1 plus 1 equals 3, because a covenant was made with God that day. When you stand there and before God take vows. And when we get down to those vows, yes, man has made these vows. They're not written in the Word of God, but we take such vows as for better or for worse. And sometimes when the worst comes, many people choose to abort and forget about their vows that they took. Marriage is a lifetime commitment. There should be a very serious heart in any man or any woman contemplating marriage. There are many reasons for getting married. I want to start with that. There are reasons for getting married. The first one's found in the book of Genesis, chapter 2, number 18. It should be understood that marriage was created because it was not good for man to be alone. God knew that Adam needed help, and he made him help not as a buddy, but as a partner who was able to satisfy another need, which was the need of procreation. That is one thing that two men cannot do. That is another thing that two women cannot do. It is good to understand this. There's another good reason for getting married, and that is to avoid fornication. The Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians 7 and 2, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man, watch this, what God says, the Holy Spirit, the Hagia Pneuma, he says to us, let every man have his own wife, and every woman have her own husband. He did not say it any other way. Understand that. Now, the world has given us a new line of thought. Let every man have his own man and every woman have her own woman. But that's the world. That's a counterfeit marriage. And that's what the devil does. He counterfeits marriage. There is another point for which we have marriage, a good reason for it, and that is to replenish the earth. That is found in the book of Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. God told them to go forth and multiply. And that is what we are supposed to do, bring forth after our own kind. We have children, and then we have grandchildren, and these are joys, and these are gifts from God. This is another good purpose and a good reason for getting married. But then there's also, you want to find a person that can help you go to heaven. Okay? You don't want nobody to help you to go the other direction. You want somebody to help you go to heaven. And for that, I found in 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 25, a good example. And the Bible said, but there was none like unto Ahab. You all remember King Ahab? He was a notorious person. There is none like unto Abraham, which did sell himself to do wickedness in the sight of the Lord, whom Jezebel his wife stirred up. There was times when Ahab, when he was confronted by the prophet of God about his sin, would repent. But then after he repented, his wife got a hold to him. And then his wife would stir him up, and then Ahab was worse than he was the first time. You need to get a wife that supports you. You need to get a husband that supports you, and they support you from what God tells them to do as a Christian and as a disciple of Christ. Not to tell you to disobey God, but to encourage you to obey God. And there is a way to encourage people. You don't have to encourage them with a lot of words. In fact, when you look in the book of 1 Peter, chapter 3 there, Peter said, don't try to win them with words, but let your chaste behavior. Give them an example to look at. Let them look at you as a child of God and let that determine how they're going to follow God. Because they can see in you being true, they have an example. But if they see you constantly coming after them, I can tell you what they're going to do. They're going to chuck their heels in and they're going to fight. And that's usually the way it ends up. And then after that, they start avoiding each other, and then communication is gone. And when communication is gone, a marriage is in serious trouble. There was once two old people who had been married for several years, and they were sitting on the front porch, and as they were sitting there, the wife said, when are you going to tell me you love me? And he said, I did tell you I love you. No, you haven't told me, and we've been married all these years, and you have not told me that you love me. He said, I told you. She said, well, you like to tell me when that you tell me that you love me. She said, he said to her, I told you the day we got married. And she said, how many years ago? 25, 30, 50, I don't know what it was. How many ago? About 50 years ago. He said, that's when I told you I married you. She said, honey, that was 50 years ago. Well, if anything changes, I'll tell you. So you got to be more encouraging than that. You have to tell somebody on a regular basis how you are supporting them and that it's love that motivates you. You also want to find, here's another good reason for marriage, you want to find someone that's going to be your best friend. Your best friend. Someone, the man by the name of Jim Backus, Backus, was asked why his marriage had survived in Hollywood all those years when others did not. He said, my wife and I are best friends. A best friend will tell you when you're wrong because they love you. Now, other people will ignore what's on the end of your nose, but your best friend will tell you. You see what I'm trying to tell you? And they don't have to apologize for loving you, your best friend, because they mimic themselves after Christ, who always is honest and open with us. And when you have a best friend like Christ who sticks closer than a brother, you have somebody that's going to be a partner for life that you can walk with and you can share life with and you can endure life with, because life gets tough. Make no mistake about it, life gets tough. Marriage is also an option and not an obligation. I come from the Apostle Paul with this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. In verse 1, he said, I would that all men were like me, that they just leave women alone altogether. He said also, everybody can't receive this. Everybody can't be a man that lives by himself. There are some men that can live by themselves. There are some women that can live by themselves, and they have no problem living by themselves, and they don't engage in illicit activities sexually. They just are okay with that. And there's nothing wrong with their health. They're just okay with that. And that's not to be looked at as somebody that's weird or strange. That's what they choose to do. The Apostle Paul said you can do more for the kingdom if you are free, because when you have a family, your responsibility is to make sure your family is constantly cared for. So many well-adjusted people are not married, and they're very active in the church. And I'm here to tell you, don't get in a hurry, even if you want to marry. Some people get in a hurry because of various things, and we'll try to touch on some of those this evening. Marriage is to be taken very seriously, and it's not a relationship to be entered into lightly. Now, I want to show you some foolish reasons now for engaging or going into marriage. There are some things that people get married for that they should have thought of several times more about before they said, I do. One of them is physical attraction. Many people fall in lust rather than love. And I don't even like to say fall in love because it sounds like an accident. And I don't want to think that my love for my wife is an accident. Love is something that cultivates itself across time. Falling in love is something that people say out there in the world. In here, you learn to love your partner because of the example Christ has taught you about how Christ loves you. The Bible says that Christ loves the church, and he gave himself for it. In other words, he denied himself for the benefit of the church. And that's what love is all about. And Jesus didn't fall into that situation. Jesus made a deliberate and determined decision to love. And that's what we need to learn how to do. If you're going to love somebody, don't fall into love. Learn how to love them because you appreciate them for their character and not just for their physicalities. Because physicalities change. My wife told me the other day something about me. I'm going to keep it to myself, though. How I was physically when she married me 44 years ago. That's changed immeasurably. She was talking about my stomach. Yeah, well. Proverbs 31 says, favor is deceitful and beauty is vain. Watch this. This is Proverbs 31:30. But a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. A woman that loves the Lord, who can stand fast when her husband's going astray or when her husband loses his way. I have been blessed to be able to see a movie by the name of War Room. I encourage anyone who hasn't seen it to see it. It's a very encouraging spiritual movie as far as I am concerned. And one of the things in there is a wife who had to meet a young or older woman who had gone through life and had some bitter experiences with her life, but she had learned something in her Christian walk that benefited her so much she was passing it on. She said prayer is her warrior sheath. In other words, she was a prayer warrior. And when things went bad for her in her marriage, she developed what was known as a prayer room or a prayer closet. And she would go in that closet. Not only would she pray, she would write down what she was praying. And it would remind her over and over again. And she kept praying those prayers because it was her trust in God that was going to get her through. And she passed that on to a younger woman, and the younger woman was blessed because of that. I'm not going to try to tell you about the movie because you may want to go see it. And my wife has already told me I tell too much about other movies and then messes it up for other people. And that's what wives do. They tell you the truth, right? So, because I do like to tell people about them, but I'm going to stop here. In Hollywood, beautiful women are idolized until their beauty fades. And when their beauty fades, they're discarded. But what we're talking about here is a beauty that is not just the physicality. There is a part of you that's beautiful on the inside. I have seen people who are in their 70s and 80s with wrinkles everywhere, but there's a beauty about them because of how they conduct themselves and how their character comes out that just is an aroma of pleasantry. It just inspires you just to be around them. And they don't look good. They don't have any wonderful bulging birthing hips and all of that stuff. They don't have bosoms that are saying yes and all of that. No, they don't have that. They just have a personality that reaches out and it speaks to you. And I have also had people that I've met who were very unattractive physically, period. There was no question about it. They were just unattractive. But they had such a wonderful spirit about themselves that was something that you ignored because you could see something beyond their physicalities. And that's what we learned to do. We learned to see people for who they are inside. Jesus talked about that. He said we clean up the cup on the outside, but you leave the inside dirty. But if you've got a dirty cup on the inside, you can have the best looking woman in the world and she can be a demon incarnate. And she'll let you know. You get married to her and she's got her nails done and her hair's all fixed and she's got on her best attire and you say, well, fix supper this evening. I ain't fixing nothing. Are you going to wash dishes? I just done my nails today. Now, she's beautiful, my brother. She is inspiring. She's so beautiful. But honestly, there's an ugliness there that will destroy that marriage across time. Now, there's another thing. Would you give up your soul for a woman? Would you give up your soul for a man? There are those who feel, when they are not directed appropriately and taught well, that they would. Remember, beauty's only skin deep. Please remember that. Because a virtuous woman is a price above rubies. A virtuous woman is a woman of value that is inward. And we're not opposed to this. A virtuous woman doesn't have to have on any kind of makeup or jewelry to be beautiful. She can look plain and be beautiful. And I'm not opposed to a woman wearing jewelry or a woman wearing makeup or any of those things that it takes to make your hair look beautiful. I remember when I was in college at David Lipscomb, one of my professors said on the same subject about women in makeup, he said he didn't oppose any woman who wore makeup. He said, and I quote, "I'm not opposed to any old barn getting a little paint." Now, I just quoted him. Now, he's talking. A virtuous woman is a crown to her husband. She's a beautiful thing for her husband. When a man has a virtuous woman and she's out and abroad, the world sees him. Sometimes people tell me that they recognize my wife is beautiful, well taken care of. And I want that to be the case because when they see her, it's an impression on me. Isn't that something? Yes, you think I'm vain. No, I'm not vain, but my wife is my crowning glory. That's the reason if I have a nice car, I want her to drive it. I'll ride a moped. It's all right because she looks good. And she makes, watch this, she makes the car look good. The car don't make her look good. Let's get this straight. She makes the car look good because it's her. She's the crown. She's the jewel of my life. And when she looks good, I look good. I remember brother at North Hill, what's his name? Brother McCall. Brother McCall was so fond of this, he would say, you tell me you love your wife, show her to me. I'll tell you if she's loved or not. If she comes up here all strung out and her slips hanging and she's looking like she's got all kinds of depression and problems like that, I'll determine right then by the fruit of that tree if you really love her or not. Because see, when they see her, they get a message about something that's going on at home. Some other reasons for not getting married is this one in particular, number 2, desperation. Desperation. There are those who feel pressured to get married. Sometimes it feels like a pressure coming from the parents because the parents want to be grandparents. And today I found out that somebody was pressuring someone and they finally got the grandchild and they showed the picture on the one of those things on your cell phone and he found out that it wasn't the grandchild he thought it was a puppy. And that's about as close to a grandchild as he's going to get because she doesn't plan to have any children, in other words. But some people are not like that. Some people are pressured to get into marriage. Sometimes it's peer pressure. Sometimes it's parent pressure. And sometimes it's considering the fact that their maternal clock is running and they feel like if they don't get married soon, they may not be able to be a mother. And they get pressed on that. Let me share a poem with you I found. At sweet 16, I first began to ask the good Lord of heaven for a man. At 17, as I recall, I wanted someone strong and tall. The Christmas that I reached 18, I fancied someone with good hair and a lean body. And then at 19, I was sure I'd fall for someone more mature. Then at 20, I thought I'd find romance with someone with a mind. I retrogressed at 21 and found the college boys more fun. My viewpoint changed at 22 when one man only was my cue. I broke my heart at 23 and asked for someone kind to me. Then begged at blessed 24 for anyone that was not a bore. Now, Lord, that I'm 25, just send me somebody that's alive. Well, it comes to that when you're desperate. You begin to, in other words, evolve, and your values evolve across time. But desperation is not something that one should give themselves to. And the young women need to be counseled on this, and young men need to be counseled on this, so that you don't get in a hurry and rush into something, because there's many a rushed marriage that ended up in a wasted life. I'm speaking from some experiences that I've experienced in my life. And there are some here who've been married for several years. You can speak to this, and they need to hear from you. That's why the Bible tells the older men to teach the younger men and the older women to teach the younger women. And this is one subject they need some discussion with and discussion about, because marriage is complicated, because we're always changing. We start out very close together, just as close. We got a lot of things in common, but as time goes on, we get further and further apart because bills come into the picture, jobs come into the picture, Insurance comes into the picture. Children come into the picture. Their schooling comes into the picture. And you and your wife get further and further apart to the point at some point you have trouble even communicating with each other because you're both so busy trying to juggle all these responsibilities. And when you were just courting, you could go home at night and it was cool. And that was it. But you don't go home at night anymore. You go home and you are still at home with everybody there. And you have to deal with all these things, and you have to deal with them appropriately. So we all change across time. We all change across time, and that's nothing wrong with that. We're supposed to change. But sometimes the changes become irritating to our partners. And if it's irritating to our partners and there's no communication, it's going to cause someone seeking communication from a foreign alien. In other words, somebody else. And that's when it really gets complicated. There's another one. Don't get married because you come from a bad environment. Some people get married to get away from mom, to get away from dad, or to get away from mom only, or to get away from dad only. Because they'll tell you, in many cases, if you talk to them, I would have married anybody just to get out of that mess. Now watch this. The idea is here you have a pattern that's developed from you running from a problem that's unpleasant to you. You run from it because the environment you're in is unpleasant, it's uncomfortable, it's difficult, and you don't want to be a part of that, so you run. And if marriage is a way that you can get out of this environment, you use this marriage so you'll have a place to stay while you're out there. But then there's that reality that things don't always go well in marriages. So your pattern is in place. So the first time it gets a little bit heated, you're off to the next place. Are you following this? That's the reason you can look at some people and you wonder, how in the world have they been married 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times? Because they've got a pattern that they're following. And they've never really settled down anywhere. And that pattern started when they first used marriage as a means of getting away from a difficult situation. At best, my friends, marriage is tough. Anybody that's been married 4 weeks knows I'm telling the truth. But if you've been married 5 years, you definitely know marriage is tough. It requires maturity. It requires maturity. It requires maturity. Marriage is not for the immature. It is not. It is not for children. Now, children they think they're ready to get married, but marriage is not for the immature. It really is not. And jumping out of one marriage into another is like jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. It just gets worse and worse and worse. What do you think about the woman at the well? She had been married 4 times, and she was now with someone who was not her husband. So she had a routine, and she was shunned by the people. We don't know how she got all those marriages. Maybe she was victim of the men at that day and time under the law who could marry a woman if he didn't like her after several weeks or several months, or she had some disproportionate, dissatisfying thing about her health or her spirit or the way she looked or the way she cooked. He would divorce her and give her a writing of divorce. The only thing was he couldn't marry her again himself, but she could marry someone else. And then if the same routine took place and that guy got tired of her, he would give her a writing of divorce. It was almost like legalized dating. And that's what Jesus addressed in Matthew chapter 19 and verse number 9. Because the way they were using the law to get out of marriage was to abuse it to the point where marriage wasn't able to stay precious in the sight of man. It was losing its value. It was losing its place in society. And God's Son did not want us to lose marriage. That's the reason he says, from the beginning it was not so. God said, I had a plan for marriage from the beginning, and I want it to stay here. There's another one, a foolish reason. A foolish reason that I think a lot of us know something about, and that's revenge. I'm going to get you attitude. I'll get back at you some kind of way. You're mad at somebody else over here, but you're going to punish them by marrying somebody else over here. It's not fair to the person you marry because they're a rebound, and they're just one of these probable depressed or desperate people who want to get married and will get married if you will marry them, and they're mad at someone else. How long do you think that's going to last? Because now there's a person who becomes victim of transference fallacy, and everything they do, it seems to be that's what he used to do. It seems to be that's what she used to do. And no one wants to be compared to someone else, especially if the someone else is someone that is a negative piece of your past experience. And there's that which people do. Let's show you what the scripture says about this in Romans chapter 12, verse 18. If it be possible, watch this, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Now, what we usually think of when this is preached is getting along with people in the church or getting along with people on the job. But this also applies with getting along with people in the house, your wife or your husband. Because this word man is anthropos, which means it's a general term that refers to men and women. So it's telling us that we should live peaceably with all men, dearly beloved. Avenge not yourself, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. That's another thing that came out of the war room. Just one more point out of the war room. That's another thing that came out of the war room. That older lady said, you trust God, honey. You let him fight the fight, because you've already proven you can't win it. You cannot win this battle. And that's what we all need to learn. You need to become a real person who has a true dependence on prayer. A prayer life that is genuine and sincere, because God can fight the battles better than any of us. And if you trust him, he will fight them, but you've got to learn to trust him, because sometimes we give up on prayer much too early. If you will just keep praying, many a person has come back to the church who was out there because grandmother was praying for him. And grandmother never did give up on them for years after year after year. Grandmother was still praying for him. And one day you see him coming into church walking down the aisle, because God brings the victory. We can't get them to do nothing, but God has ways that'll move a person. But we have to be people who really believe that prayer changes people. Because some people say prayer changes things, and that is true. Prayer changes things, but prayer also changes people, and people change things. If we will but trust in God and trust in prayer and be perseverant about it. He said, seek and you shall find, ask and it shall be given. And he said, knock and it shall be open unto you. The message in that parable is to tell us, don't give up on prayer. And even when it doesn't seem like God is answering you, keep praying. Keep on praying. Keep on calling on him who is able to give you the victory. And trust him, because God can give you a victory that's truly a genuine victory. There's another one. It's to cover mistakes. Have you ever heard of shotgun wedding? That's a bad one, isn't it? That's a terrible mistake, and two mistakes don't make a right. We already have one mistake. Now you're going to make somebody, and you really can't make nobody love nobody. And you can put two people together. It's like the old illustration the older preachers used to do. They take the illustration of two cats with their tails tied together and say that you had union, but you had no unity when you throw them over a clothesline. Yeah, that's true. You have union because they're hooked together or tied together, but there's no unity, and they fight when that's the case. And that's what we're trying to get you to see this evening, that forcing people to marry because you have spiritual convictions and someone in your family has made a mistake, but making them to try to marry someone else is making another mistake. It's not going to work. And as time goes on, let me share with you something. There was a church that I read about during this research that all but split over this very subject right here. And another thing that they do, they want to make somebody have a shotgun wedding because the baby needs a name. Well, give it your name, honey. That's right. He'll have a name. Just give him your name. And if father don't want to give him his name, let father find his way. But he'll have a name. I know we're looking for a respectable type situation, but we got to live with this where we are. Okay? We're reaping what we've sown. And sometimes we reap bitterness because we make our mistakes. And hopefully because of the consequence we receive from our mistake, we won't do it again so quickly, if we do it at all. So what we're trying to get people to see is trying to cover up a mistake is not wise. And the Holy Spirit says this through Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse number 2. Be not rash with your mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and thou upon the earth. Therefore let thy words be few. Before you say I do, make sure you're ready to follow through with what you're saying I do too. If you are not willing to be for better or worse, don't say it. because worse is certainly going to come. Better will be there. You're gonna have better that day. Y'all gonna eat ice cream and cake, and people gonna be taking your picture. They're gonna take you. They're gonna give you gifts. That's better, right? Isn't that good? That's a wonderful day. We have the best time in a wedding it's ever gonna be on that Saturday afternoon, or whatever time we get married. That's about the best it's ever gonna get in that marriage. But now when you get home, worse may show up. And it may show up tomorrow to the point where you wake up and said, what was happening with me that I made those statements just yesterday? And as one of my friends is fond of telling me, I was ready to take her back to her mother. I imagine she's ready to take him somewhere too. One asked this, what will this person be for me? Will they make a good mate? Have you ever seen the movie The Perfect Guy? Y'all look at movies too. That's good. The Perfect Guy got my attention because this woman believed that this guy was perfect, and she just had a bad situation with her paramour that wasn't cooperating with her desires to get married and have a family. They've already seen it, Stephanie, so I can tell them. This part, there's just one part here. Anyway, she met this guy. He was ideal in every way. On the outside, his manners were perfect. He was an impeccable find. But the problem was he was bipolar and psychotic. And he was lethal. He was not just a psychotic that's crazy. He was dangerous. Well, that's enough of that. In other words, is this person really, get to know the person you're planning on marrying before you say I do. And that may take a while. It may take more than a week or two. I've heard people say, I'm just so in love. I'm just, and they really don't know what love is, because love is a decision. Love is those days that you can't stand your partner, but you got to love them anyway. They did everything except what was lovable, and you still got to love them. And if they asked you to forgive them, even though it hurts you to say it, you got to say yes. You say, I don't have to forgive them. Well, then God won't forgive you, honey. And every time you ask God to forgive you, you're looking for him to forgive you. So forgiveness is a conditional thing in Christianity. If they will respond with repentance, then you are responsible to forgive them. It also says, will she help me and my baby go to heaven? Will he help me and my baby go to heaven? Will he be a good father? Will she be a good mother? Do I love him with all my heart, or is this some passing fad? Do I want to spend the rest of my life with this person? These are questions you need to ask. While we're all enamored with each other and our physicalities and the wonder of that moment, because you get all these euphoric feelings. You remember how it felt when you thought you was in love or whatever it was you was going through? You remember that? It was just overwhelming. You couldn't think right. You couldn't think about nothing but them, and you couldn't sleep at night. You woke up thinking of them, and you woke up in the night calling them, and you stayed on the phone till your parents took you off the phone and removed your phone. All those things couldn't keep you away from them. Parents said, don't go over to the house. You went anyway. Are you following this? It's a real unusual experience, and it causes you to not have a very good grip on your attention. You don't have a good grip on your attention. You're focused on that feeling, that emotional rush that you're getting, and all the little details that are going on around you, you miss them. And then one day you've said, I do now, and all of these little quirks that this person's got start to show up. Because there's one thing about familiarity, it breeds contempt. In other words, the more you're with a person, after a while, it gets old. I used to put up with you saying this, but not today. Okay? They've been saying that, honey, for years. Listen, they've been saying that for years. It's not a new saying they've got. They've been saying it for years. You just didn't pay attention to it then. But now, today, it just blares out at you, and it just attacks you in such a way you can't get away from it. These are some foolish reasons for getting married. And believe it or not, these are realities. These are not fictional. Here's another one. It's in vogue. It's popular to get married. All my friends are getting married. All my girlfriends, all my boyfriends, they're all married. I don't want to be left out. I don't want to feel like I'm lost. My maternal clock is running. I don't want to run out of time to have a child. I need someone to procreate with. The whole 9 yards comes down the pike. And it causes your judgment to be once again clouded. Keep in mind the decision you make is a lifetime. Now, I know the world will give you a way out. What is it now? Uncontested divorce? What other kind they got out there? Oh, there's one. There's a new one. No fault at all. We just don't want to be together. Here's the latest one I got. We just going to be married 2 years, and here's a contract that says so. And at the end of 2 years, you on your way. And if you got any money, a prenuptial. Used to be if you married a man, whatever he had was yours, and whatever she had was yours too. That's not the case anymore. I'm going to tell you now what's going to be yours, and when we separate, which is also premeditated seemingly, I'm already determining we're going to be separated sooner or later. This is going to be mine, and this is what you're going to get, and it's in writing. You heard of those, right? This is what the world will do, and God has already said, I'm not in keeping with that. I'm not in agreement with that. I'm not going to support that. I'm going to give you 2 reasons that you can get out of marriage. One of them is that somebody in that marriage is unfaithful to that covenant, to that contract. And the other one is God's hand moves and someone dies. And when they die, that covenant is no longer active and they're free to marry whomsoever they will. Watch this, in the Lord. Now I'm talking to Christians now. In the Lord. Marry someone in the Lord, not in the church. Am I being serious? I'm trying to be serious about this. Because just because they are setting up in here, I told you who come to church every Sunday yesterday. The devil is always near. Marry someone who's in the Lord. And you can tell if they're in the Lord. You know who's walking in the light. A tree is known by its fruit. You cannot judge them, but you can look at that fruit. And Jesus made it clear. He said a good tree does not produce bad fruit. And a bad tree does not produce. It does not. And he said, you shall know them by their fruit. You'll know who's in the church. You also know who's not. And they may look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It doesn't matter. Or any other. What's another dog man with a nice body? Witherspoon. They may look like Witherspoon. What's that little guy that's on TV all the time? Yeah, him too. They may look good, in other words. But that doesn't mean that's going to last. Just because they're looking good doesn't mean they're good, okay? Watch their fruit. Listen to their words. Listen to what their character is all about. If these kind of things were told to many of our kids before they got married, they'd be a little slower in getting into this thing, and they'd take a little more caution about who they say I do to. Because once you say I do, it's on. And now 1 + 1 = 3 because God's in the mix. And that's who you're going to have to answer to. The next one is this. Oh, well, I didn't finish. Keep in mind these words. Matthew 19:6. Wherefore, they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. And Jesus Christ is the one who spoke these words that came from the words of God in Genesis. That when God puts 2 people together, he doesn't want anybody destroying that covenant. It's a contract. It's agreement between you and that person and God that you are going to share your life together with that person for better or worse because we're not always our best. And there's none of us that are perfect. We're all reaching for perfection, but in the process of reaching, some days we fall. Sometimes we fail. Sometimes we're just not the best that we could be. But we're still in the marriage anyway. And this is where your strength comes from. When you learn how to be patient with your partner. You learn how to endure their particulars that you don't appreciate. And they learn how to deal with your particulars that you don't appreciate. They don't appreciate. And as time goes on, you learn how to love each other in spite of each other. I love you now because you're you. Now, don't get like my wife told me one time, because she was all over my case. It was terrible. It was a horrible day. I'll never forget that. And I've told this everywhere I've been, from California to Texas, because I think somebody needs to hear this. I was having an argument with my wife one day, and I said, look, I'm confused. What is it that you having such a problem with about me? I just don't understand it. I'm just all over your nerves. What is it that's about me that's bothering you so much? She said, just you. No detail, just you. That's a pretty big answer. You know, how do you deal with that, Brother Wright? Just you. You just such a mess. The whole package is messed up. Don't tell nobody that. It hurts people's feelings, I tell you. The next thing I want to share with you, and this is my final point on some foolish things about getting married. This one is current. It's to cover up their sexual preference. That's where we are now. People don't want to walk like they are ungodly, even though they're ungodly. They want to have a respectable relationship that is a respectable relationship in this society. Marriage is a respectable relationship in our society. And some people who are of a homosexual persuasion, be it lesbian or gay male, they want to have their sexuality covered, and they want to cover it with God's righteousness, which in this case is not going to work. I'd like for you to look with me in Romans chapter 1 and verse 24 through 27. And the Bible tells us that God's messenger, Paul the apostle, wrote these words over 2,000 years ago, and they're still relevant today. He says in Romans 1:24, wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts. And I want you to understand one of the points we're making here. Homosexuality is based on lust. Now, I know they're saying, you can't tell me who to love. We're not talking about loving. We're talking about lust. It's a drive. It's an inordinate drive. It is an unnatural drive for a man to desire a man. That's lust. It's an inordinate drive for a woman to desire a woman. That's lust. They call it love, but that's lust. Because the whole purpose for a man and woman coming together and having desire for each other is procreation and pleasure in the marriage. And one thing a man and a man can't do is procreate. And a woman can't do is procreate. The only thing that's giving them children now is broken marriages, or families that parents have died and left them and someone has them in an orphanage. But they can't produce their own. But back to this. Paul said, he said, in their hearts they dishonor their own bodies between themselves. They dishonor themselves. Who changed the truth of God, into a lie, which is to make it a counterfeit, saying that men married to men is marriage. You see, that's turning it into a lie. That's not the marriage God created in the garden. And Jesus, if he were here, would say from the beginning it was not so. And we look again here. It said, and worshiped and served the creature more than the creator. In this day and time that this was written, there was a temple for Diana. There was a temple for Aphrodite. There was a temple for Venus. And these were centers where people went to worship those gods. Those were fertility gods. And so men could go to the temple and there have sex with a Vespa virgin, that's what they called them, and it was okay because he went there to have sex with her so his wife could get pregnant at home. You figure it out. Because if he had sex with her, the goddess would make her fertile. And then she would have a child once he went back home and had sex with her. And then they found out that venereal diseases were coming up. What does that sound like? It sounds like God was not in favor of it. But this was what was happening in the day and time when Paul wrote this, especially in Rome, Pompeii, and places like that. This was a practice, and it was acceptable. Wives didn't get angry when their husbands went up there because they thought he was going up there so that they could get pregnant. And they were okay with it. That shows you where people can get if they're not led by God. Okay, back to this. who is blessed forever, amen, the God of heaven, the creator, is blessed forever. For this cause, this is horrible right here, church. For this cause, God gave them up unto vile affections. There's one thing I pray God never do with me, and that's give me up to me. I just pray God never just says, I'm letting you have it. I'm through with you. I don't want that. And I don't think, and I believe you don't either. You really don't want God to give up on you. And then he says here, he said, gave up vile affection forevermore. For even, watch what he says, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. Is that not what we're looking at now? And Paul said in the latter days, perilous times would come. We're already looking at this. He says, turn the natural use, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned, there's that drive, burned in their lust one toward another. Men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. Now watch what he said, and receiving in themselves that recompense. In other words, there's a consequence for this behavior that God does not approve of. There are some STDs that are difficult but not fatal, such as chlamydia. And then there are some that are critically fatal, such as syphilis and AIDS. God is telling you here he's not in approval of this. You don't hear of a man and a woman who's married and true to each other having sexually transmitted diseases in their union. That's something that comes from somebody who's went outside and brought it in. Because it's not going to be, because God, when he has a respect for your relationship, he blesses that. He protects that. He takes care of that. But if you violate that, there are consequences he has put here to let you know I'm not playing with you. That's what God's trying to get us to see. I'm not playing like you're playing. You're messing around like this is some kind of game. From one man to the next, from one woman to the next. It's okay. And by the time I was here in Cuyahoga County Children and Family Services, we had some men who literally bragged on how many children they had by how many women they had. And we're talking some had as many as 22 children by 22 different women. And their name was on our board out there for back child support. And I'm not talking about a couple of $100. When you got 22 children, the numbers are off the charts. When you are on the most wanted at Cuyahoga County for not taking care of your children, you are in a serious state of affairs. But we had them. 22 children by 22 different women, and was looking for more. To him, it was a game. To him, it was, what's this thing we call, what men go through, hunt and conquer? Men are by nature hunters, but once they conquer, they're bored with their catch. Then they go off looking for other things to hunt. And that's what he's trying to practice in his life, and is practicing, unless someone's got him off the street. And who knows how many women he has by now. Here's the other part. What's wrong with these women? You don't have to go to Murray or Mario, whatever his name is, to find out you know that your baby's got baby sisters and brothers all over town by all these other women. And God forbid if he ever has a funeral, who's going to be there? And have you ever been to those? Well, yeah. I've been to those funerals. It wasn't but 2 women and it was a war. Can you imagine what 22 would be like? And all of them are saying, well, he's the father of my child. He's the father of my child. No, it's my child. And you got 22 women in there arguing about him being the father to their child. And when we disrespect God, this is the kind of chaos and confusion we can look for. And if man does not have something to regulate him, this is the kind of animal behavior you're going to get. Because this is animal. This is carnal. This is not inspired by God. God does not teach us to go around looking for women as if they're in heat. You hear what I'm saying? Because that's total disrespect for a woman. He doesn't have any care for you at all except for what you can provide him with, and that's that satisfaction for the moment. And then how does he treat you after he's had you? These are things that should be carefully thought through and thought out. And especially if you know he's got 21 kids all over town, he's the last man you want to be with. You ain't gonna never have no money if you marry him. Because all them women gonna be asking for some of that man's check. Do you know what it takes to raise one child in America today? The stats are out. I'm not even going to go into that. There are stats that tell us we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars per child. This man's got 22, and he's not supporting any of them. He's against the law. That's the reason his name's on the most wanted down there. They can't find him. They'd put him in jail. Somebody said they ought to neuter him. I don't want to go that far. But nonetheless, this is where we are. And watch this. There are those who say one is born a homosexual. Well, if one can be born a homosexual, then one can claim I'm born a rapist. You see, if I can say I was born a homosexual, God made me this way, then a rapist can claim the same. I was born a rapist. Or I was born a child molester. Or I was born a criminal. I was born a bully. You can pull any of those things in there when you start saying I was born this and God made me this way. I was born this way is what they're saying. And like Brother Wood said, when you become aware of God's plan, you have to be born again. And if you're born again, you can get out of whatever you're in. Rapists can be reformed. Mobsters can be reformed. Bullies can be reformed, and so can homosexuals. I think I told you yesterday, I'll share with you one more time. In my hometown, there were several men who were homosexuals. All of us knew who they were, and they were constantly in trouble with the community because at that time, if you were gay, it was dangerous for you. Okay? Nobody treated you like you had special rights. In fact, they would take you out because they didn't think you should even be around, okay? They didn't like them. Well, all of these guys were practicing in our city. But one of them was smart enough to get baptized at the church I was in. Now, at that time, I was in denominational arena. But he got baptized in the church. And he gave up homosexuality. He moved to another city, married a wife, and reared a family. He's still alive. The other 8 that I know are all dead. And all of them died from things called acquired immune deficiency. They weren't in their 40s. But they were practicing something that God's already said is going to be a consequence if you practice it. He said it this way. He said, they are receiving themselves that recompense or their reward of their own error, which is meat. In other words, this is what they deserve for violating God's will. God is trying to make an example of this to tell us don't practice it. No, I can't tell you who to love, but I can tell you how God said love. And he said that a man should love a woman and a woman should love a man. Now let me show you how God said love the man, and I'm closing right here. This is most important. God tells a man to love a woman as Christ loved the church. And then he says in another verse, no man ever hated his own flesh, but he loves it, he cherishes it, he nurtures it, he treats it with kindness, he takes his care with it. Is that correct? I'm talking about the book of Ephesians chapter 5, verse 28, 25, 29, those verses. And then he said that a man should treat the woman like Christ treats the church. Anything other than that is mistreatment. Any man that beats his wife is mental because he wouldn't beat himself unless he was certifiable. Are you hearing this? Somebody run around beating on themselves is certifiable. They need to be put away with a jacket on that prevents them from hurting themselves. Is that not correct? That's what asylums are for. If a man is violating himself, he needs some protection from himself. And if he's violating his wife, she needs protection from him. And if she prays much, God will protect her. Now, I don't tell women to stay in those states, Because some women need to recognize that God said a man that does not take care of his own family is worse than an infidel. If you break that down, worse than an unbeliever. Worse than an unbeliever. He also said, don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. Sometimes you have to recognize if a person is violent, it shows up just like in that perfect guy. The perfect guy's violence showed up. The man came out of a gas station. Hold on. The man came out of a gas station, walked over to the car and was talking to the woman in the car about the car. This guy came out and had one of those psychotic episodes and nearly killed the man just because of what he thought he was doing. He got no facts. He got no details. He thought he was flirting with his woman, his girlfriend, and he just started to beat the man to the point of an unmerciful act that the man came out of the store, said, I've already called the police, get out of here, because he was trying to kill this man who was only complimenting, guess what, that man's car. He was just giving compliments to this totally restored car. Misunderstood, he was about to commit a crime, because if he'd have been left on that man, I think he might have killed him. She got a glimpse of how dangerous he was. At that point, she started trying to get away from him. And at this point, he started pursuing her. He started following her and started trying to hurt her even more. He even ended up killing her neighbor and some other people and was out to kill her. This is not a man like Christ in any definition you know. Christians don't do this. Christ did not demonstrate himself like that toward the church because we are the church. How does he treat us? He treats us with love. And what else? Caring. And he gives us grace, which we don't deserve. God treats us with respect and love and passion. And then when you see a Christian demonstrating the other, I told you the devil comes to church. You know who you're looking at, because a tree is known by its fruit. And Jesus don't produce that kind of fruit. Amen, Brother Hogin. I know you know something. I know we all know something about these things. This is a danger to our community. This is the reason many of our children have bad attitudes. Some of our children come into our community. When I was working with Children and Family Services, some of our children thought that women were supposed to be abused. They were supposed to be mistreated. They were supposed to be treated like less than animals. And that's the reason they called them after dogs, remember? I still say that's somebody's mother you're talking about. Somebody's grandmother. Somebody's sister. And how would you think if they were doing that to your mother, your sister, your daughter? How would you feel about that? And yet that happens. And these are the things that says, you take your time before you say I do. Because after you say I do, there you are. And it's not easy to get away. It's not easy to get out, if you're fortunate enough to get out. How many people have we heard of recently in Tennessee? A man who just gets mad at his girlfriend and shoots her outside of her garage because he was rejected, because she was afraid of him, Brother Wright. And she said, I don't want to see you no more. And he said, if I can't have you. And at this point, that's true, because he killed her. This happens with Christianity too. Greenville Avenue, Texas. The husband told the wife he didn't want her to go to church. She went anyway. He trailed her, shot her dead in the parking lot. I told you the devil is at the house. He followed her to church. He murdered her in the parking lot. Had lots of witnesses. He had no defense. And it was all because she wanted to go and worship God. Unequally yoked. He was the one telling her, you're not going to go to church. Now watch this. The Bible said, obey your husband in everything, women. But he also gives you a model. He said, as Christ loved the church. A man will not find Christ telling a woman not to go worship his father. Ain't no way in this world you're going to make me believe that. The devil will. Amen, Brother Hogin. Y'all acting like y'all know some devils. You just don't want to say nothing because you don't want them on your case. Okay, well. The truth will set you free, honey. They need to be under spotlight. They need to be pulled out and put in the front. They need to be made known so you can protect your family from them. Because next may be your daughter, may be your sister, or your mother may fall in love with him. Somebody needs to be sharing information to protect our families, not to set them up for disaster. I've shared with you some things tonight, and I have to close right here, about some foolish reasons or some good reasons for getting married and some foolish reasons for getting married. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about divorce is not the answer. And I'm talking about divorce and remarriage. And don't bring me no hypotheticals. I don't even deal with hypotheticals. People make up stuff. And if you're going to make up something that only Jesus wouldn't even fool with. What if mama did this and she's married 7 times removed, who's the father? And all? I don't want to hear about that. Do you have something that you really are going through? And how did you get in that if you were following God's word? Because hypotheticals can go on as long as you can have imagination. That old crazy one, what if the man going up the baptism steps falls over dead? Is he saved because he didn't get baptized? You talk to Jesus about that. Because we don't know what that man was going. And I'm not going to try to be judge of that. And I'm not going to try to judge God. And listen, leave that alone. That's in God's hands. I got one of them, brother. Can I do one more thing before I sit down? Yes. One more thing. Brother Wright, I got one more thing. When one of them came to me with that stuff, saying that what if, Sister Agnes, what if the man walking up the steps who just said he wanted to be baptized and he didn't get baptized, he fell over dead before he got up there, was he saved because he didn't get baptized? I left it alone. But then I asked him, you say, if you believe, all you got to do is believe, and you're saved. Well, what if you are flip-flopping back and forth between whether I believe and I don't believe, and I don't know if I believe or not, I want to believe, but I'm not sure if I'm going to believe, and you fall dead? That was the end of that discussion. Now, what I'm trying to show you is hypotheticals don't help us. You follow what God's plan is and let that be it. And whatever happens out of that, God is the judge. Because he has appointed a day in righteousness in this world when he will judge the whole world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained, whereof the assurance is given unto all men, and that he has raised him from the dead. That's in Acts 17:31. I can find that. But he told me not to judge you. He told me to love you, and when you violate me, to forgive you. That's what he told me to do. And you know, if we will do that, we'll have a full-time responsibility. And our marriages will survive if we can learn how to love and forgive. And I'm not talking about love like the world loves. I'm talking about loving like Jesus has shown us he loves. He said, by this all men shall know you are what? My, in that you have one for another. And that goes for husbands and wives.